A small girl stood by the tree, holding a cardboard sign. "For sale," it read. Below her, a bicycle nobody wanted. When the bikers stopped, she whispered, "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." What they discovered next would shake an entire community. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories like this. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees lining Riverside Avenue, casting dappled shadows on the cracked sidewalk where Emma Mitchell sat cross-legged beside her bicycle. The cardboard sign she'd made from a cereal box trembled slightly in her small hands. "For sale" was written in careful, childish letters with a marker that had started to run out of ink halfway through the word sale. The bicycle leaning against the tree trunk had training wheels, a basket with plastic flowers, and handlebar streamers that had once sparkled, but now hung limp and faded. It had been her most prized possession, the gift she'd received for her birthday years before, back when birthdays still meant cake and candles and laughter filling their small apartment. Emma's stomach growled for what felt like the 100th time that morning. She pressed her hand against her belly, trying to quiet the sound, trying to ignore the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. 2 days. It had been 2 days since she'd seen her mother eat anything. 2 days since Emma herself had finished the last of the crackers they'd found in the back of the cupboard. Her mother, Sarah, sat on the apartment building steps 20 feet behind her, wrapped in a thin jacket despite the warmth of the day. She'd insisted on coming outside, on watching Emma from a distance, though Emma had begged her to stay inside and rest. But Sarah had been adamant. "I won't let you do this alone," she'd whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. The sound of engines rumbling in the distance made Emma's heart skip. She straightened her sign, practicing the smile she'd been rehearsing in the bathroom mirror that morning. "Be brave," she whispered to herself. "Mommy needs you to be brave." The rumbling grew louder, deeper, the kind of sound that made windows rattle and dogs bark. Emma watched as 5 motorcycles appeared around the corner, moving in formation like a small parade. They were impressive machines, chrome gleaming in the sunlight, engines purring with power that Emma could feel in her chest. The riders wore vests with patches, their presence commanding attention from everyone on the street. Neighbors who'd been pretending not to notice Emma suddenly found reasons to retreat inside. Mrs. Patterson across the street quickly pulled her curtains closed. Mr. Chen, who'd been washing his car, hurried into his garage. But Emma stayed exactly where she was. She needed this. She needed someone, anyone, to stop. The lead motorcycle slowed as it approached, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. The rider, a man with weathered features and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, pulled to a stop directly in front of her. One by one, the other 4 motorcycles formed a semicircle around the tree. "Well now," the lead rider said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he cut his engine and swung his leg over the bike. "What do we have here?" Emma stood up quickly, almost dropping her sign in her nervousness. "My bicycle, sir. It's for sale. It's a really good bicycle. The training wheels are sturdy, and the basket can hold lots of things, and the streamers are pretty when you ride fast." The man, whose vest bore the name Jake on a patch, crouched down to her eye level. Behind him, his companions dismounted their bikes, watching the interaction with expressions Emma couldn't quite read. "Is that so?" Jake asked, examining the bicycle with exaggerated seriousness. "And why are you selling such a nice bicycle?" Emma's rehearsed smile faltered. She'd practiced her sales pitch, had prepared herself to be cheerful and convincing. But she hadn't prepared for genuine kindness. Tears suddenly threatened at the corners of her eyes. "Because," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emma watched as Jake's expression changed, as something sharp and painful crossed his weathered features. Behind him, she heard one of the other bikers curse softly under his breath. "Your mama?" Jake asked gently. "Where is she, sweetheart?" Emma pointed toward the apartment steps where Sarah sat. Her mother was trying to stand, trying to maintain some dignity despite the situation, but Emma could see how much effort it took. Sarah's face was pale, her movements slow and careful, as if every action required more energy than she had to spare. Jake rose to his feet and gestured to his companions. "Derek, Tommy, stay with the bikes. Diane, Alex, come with me." They approached Sarah with a respect that surprised Emma. These were people who commanded respect wherever they went, Yet they approached her mother as equals, as human beings worthy of dignity. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice losing none of its gentleness, "your daughter tells us you haven't eaten in 2 days. Is that true?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Emma could see her mother fighting to maintain her composure, to protect the last shreds of pride she had left. "I don't want charity," Sarah managed to say. "Emma shouldn't have told you. We're managing." "Mama," Emma whispered, moving to her mother's side. "Please." Jake exchanged glances with his companions. The woman, Diane, stepped forward. She was tall, with an air of authority that somehow made her kindness even more powerful. "Ma'am, we're not offering charity," Diane said firmly. "But we are human beings who can't walk away from a child trying to sell her bicycle so her mother can eat. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us what happened, and we're going to figure this out together. Can you do that?" Sarah's resistance crumbled. The weight she'd been carrying alone for so long was suddenly too heavy to bear in the face of genuine compassion. She sank back onto the steps, and Emma sat beside her, holding her mother's trembling hand. "It was my husband," Sarah began, her voice breaking. "Emma's father, Marcus Caldwell. He worked at Riverside Financial Services for years. We had a good life, not wealthy but comfortable, safe. Then he lost his job, or so he said." The bikers listened in silence as Sarah's story spilled out, years of pain and betrayal condensing into a few devastating minutes. He started gambling. Online poker, sports betting, whatever he could find. I didn't know at first. He hid it well. But then the bills started going unpaid. The electricity got shut off. The landlord started leaving notices. When I confronted him, he said he was handling it, that I should trust him. Emma squeezed her mother's hand, remembering those nights when they'd eaten dinner by candlelight because there was no electricity, when her father had laughed and called it an adventure. By the time I realized how bad it was, he'd emptied our savings, maxed out our credit cards, even took out loans in my name without telling me. $70,000 gone. And then one morning I woke up and he was just gone. Took the last of our money and disappeared. Jake's jaw tightened. "When was this?" "6 months ago. I've been trying to work, trying to keep us afloat, but the debt collectors found me. They garnished my wages. I was working as a nurse at Riverside General Hospital, but I couldn't keep up with the shifts after they took most of my paycheck. I got sick, missed too many days, and they let me go." "A nurse," Diane repeated, something sharp entering her voice. "You're a trained nurse and you can't find work?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "The debt shows up on background checks. The gambling debt, the unpaid loans, all in my name because he forged my signature. No hospital will hire me now. They say I'm a financial risk." Derek, one of the bikers who'd stayed with the motorcycles, had walked closer during the story. "This husband of yours, this Marcus Caldwell, where is he now?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "He disappeared completely. Changed his phone number, deleted his social media, just vanished like smoke. Left us with nothing but debt and shame." Emma felt her mother's tears falling onto their joined hands. She'd seen her mother cry before, but never like this. Never with this complete surrender to despair. "And the hospital where you worked?" Jake asked carefully. "Riverside General? Who made the decision to fire you?" "The Human Resources Director, Daniel Whitmore. He said his hands were tied, that it was hospital policy. But I saw the way he looked at me when he delivered the news, like I was trash that needed to be taken out." Jake pulled out his phone and stepped away, speaking in low tones to someone. The other bikers formed a protective circle around Emma and Sarah, as if shielding them from the judgment of the watching neighborhood. Tommy, a younger biker with kind eyes, crouched down beside Emma. "Hey there, what's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "That's a pretty name. Emma, how long since you ate?" Emma didn't want to answer, didn't want to add to her mother's shame. But Tommy's eyes held nothing but concern. "Yesterday morning, there was some rice left." Tommy stood abruptly and walked to his motorcycle, pulling a protein bar from his saddlebag. He unwrapped it and handed it to Emma. "Eat this, right now. Your mom can yell at me later if she wants, but you're eating this." Emma looked at her mother, who nodded through her tears. The protein bar tasted like the best meal Emma had ever eaten. Jake returned, his expression unreadable. "Diane, take Sarah and Emma to Ruby's diner. Tell Ruby to feed them whatever they want on my tab. Derek, you and Tommy start making calls. I want to know everything about Marcus Caldwell and Daniel Whitmore. And I mean everything. Wait, Sarah protested weakly. I can't accept. You're not accepting charity, Alex, the fifth biker, interrupted gently. You're accepting help from people who've been where you are. Every single one of us has a story, ma'am. Every single one of us has been broken by this world at some point. The difference is, we had people who caught us when we fell. Now we're those people for you and your daughter. Diane helped Sarah to her feet. Come on. When's the last time you had a real meal? I don't remember, Sarah admitted. As Diane led them toward her motorcycle, Emma looked back at her bicycle still leaning against the tree, the for sale sign fluttering in the breeze. Don't worry about the bike, Jake called to her. We'll keep it safe. You're going to need it again. But Emma barely heard him. Her mind was spinning with the sudden change in their circumstances, with the kindness of these strangers who looked dangerous, but acted like guardian angels. At Ruby's Diner, a cozy establishment 3 blocks away, they were greeted by an older woman with silver hair and a smile that reached her eyes. Ruby took one look at Sarah and Emma and didn't ask any questions. She simply seated them in the back corner booth and brought out soup, sandwiches, fruit, and hot chocolate. Emma ate slowly, her stomach protesting after 2 days of emptiness. Sarah picked at her food, still overwhelmed by shame and gratitude in equal measure. How do you know Jake? Sarah finally asked Diane. Diane smiled. Jake saved my life. Not figuratively. Literally. I was in a bad situation, trapped in a relationship with someone who hurt me. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back. Jake found me at a gas station, saw the bruises I was trying to hide, and asked me one question. Do you want help? When I said yes, he changed everything. That was years ago, Sarah asked. Years ago. Now I run a women's shelter across town, the Lighthouse Foundation. We help women escape abuse, rebuild their lives. Jake and his crew, the Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club, they support our work. They're not what people assume when they see the vests and the bikes. Emma listened to every word, filing away this information, trying to understand how her world had shifted so dramatically in the span of an hour. Your husband, Diane said carefully. The gambling, the debt, the disappearance. You said his name was Marcus Caldwell? Sarah nodded, pain flashing across her features at the mention of his name. I think I need to tell you something, Diane said slowly, and it's not going to be easy to hear. Sarah set down her spoon, her expression hardening. What? That name sounds familiar. Marcus Caldwell. There's a financial advisor at Prestige Investment Services downtown. He drives a luxury car, wears expensive suits, and from what I've heard, he's been quite successful lately. Very successful. The color drained from Sarah's face. That's impossible. Marcus destroyed our credit, our savings. He left us with nothing. Did you ever actually see proof that he lost the money gambling? Diane asked gently. Or did he just tell you that's what happened? Sarah's hands began to tremble. He showed me websites, betting receipts. He cried, said he had a problem, begged for forgiveness. Websites and receipts can be faked, Diane said. If someone wanted to hide assets, to start a new life without their family, gambling addiction would be a perfect cover story. People don't question it. They assume the money's gone, irretrievable. Emma watched her mother's face cycle through denial, realization, and fury. He's alive, Sarah whispered. He's not just alive, he's thriving. While we're starving, while our daughter is trying to sell her bicycle, he's living a new life. We don't know for certain it's the same person, Diane cautioned. But Jake is looking into it. If it is him, if he did this deliberately, then we're going to make sure he faces exactly what he's done. Outside Ruby's Diner, Jake was on his 3rd phone call, and the picture forming was making his blood boil. Marcus Caldwell, financial advisor, had started at Prestige Investment Services exactly 6 months ago. Around the same time, Marcus Caldwell, husband and father, had disappeared. Same name, same age, same background in finance. And from what Jake's contacts were telling him, this Marcus Caldwell was making serious money. He lived in a downtown penthouse, drove a car that cost more than most people's houses, and was engaged to a woman who worked in fashion. Engaged. The word stuck in Jake's throat like broken glass. His phone rang. It was Tommy. Boss, you need to hear this. I talked to someone at Riverside General Hospital. The HR director, Daniel Whitmore. He and Marcus Caldwell are golf buddies. They've been photographed together at the Riverbend Country Club. Jake's grip on his phone tightened. So when Sarah applied for work after Marcus left, Whitmore knew exactly who she was. More than that. According to my source, Whitmore made calls to other hospitals, blacklisted her, made sure she couldn't work anywhere in the city. It wasn't about the debt on background checks. It was deliberate sabotage. Why? Jake demanded. Why would he do that? Best guess. Marcus asked him to. Wanted to make sure his old life stayed buried. Couldn't risk Sarah getting back on her feet and coming after him. Jake ended the call and stood in the middle of the sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone. This was worse than simple abandonment. This was calculated destruction. Marcus Caldwell hadn't just left his family. He'd systematically destroyed their ability to survive without him, all to protect his new life. And Daniel Whitmore had helped him do it. Jake looked back toward Ruby's diner, where Emma was probably finishing her first real meal in days, where Sarah was probably crying tears of relief and shame. They had no idea yet just how deep the betrayal went, but they would. And when they did, Jake was going to make sure they had everything they needed to fight back. Because if there was one thing the Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club understood, it was that evil thrived when good people did nothing. And they were done doing nothing. The war had just begun, and Marcus Caldwell had no idea what was coming for him. The Prestige Investment Services building rose 20 stories into the downtown skyline, all glass and steel and corporate arrogance. Jake stood across the street, watching people in business attire flow in and out of the revolving doors, everyone moving with the confident urgency of people who believed their time was more valuable than anyone else's. Somewhere in that building was Marcus Caldwell, the man who'd left his wife and daughter to starve while he built a new life on the ashes of their old one. Jake's phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane with a photo attached. The image showed a man in his late 30s stepping out of a luxury sedan, his face clearly visible. Square jaw, expensive haircut, the kind of smile that sold confidence to people with money to invest. That's him, the text read. Sarah confirmed. She started shaking when she saw the photo. Emma didn't recognize him at first. She said he looks different, happier. Jake's jaw clenched. Of course he looked happier. He'd traded his family for freedom, responsibility for selfishness, and apparently the exchange rate had been favorable. Derek, who'd been standing guard by the motorcycles, walked over. What's the play, boss? We watch, Jake said. We learn his patterns, where he goes, who he sees, what matters to him. And then we take all of it apart, piece by piece, until he understands exactly what he did. That's a long game, Derek observed. Sarah and Emma have been suffering for 6 months. Marcus gets to suffer too. We're not rushing this. But even as Jake said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. Because back at Ruby's diner, Sarah had stopped eating halfway through her meal, her face pale and stricken as Diane showed her the photo. And Emma had asked the question that broke everyone's heart. Why didn't Daddy want us anymore? Some things couldn't wait. Across town at the Lighthouse Foundation Women's Shelter, Sarah sat in Diane's office, staring at the photo of her husband on Diane's phone. The man in the image was Marcus, but also not Marcus. Same face, same features, but everything else was different. The Marcus she'd known wore department store suits and drove a 10-year-old sedan. This Marcus wore designer labels and leaned against a car that cost more than their entire wedding. He was planning this, Sarah said, her voice hollow. All along. The gambling story, the debt, the crying and apologizing. It was all theater. Emma sat beside her mother, holding a stuffed bear that one of the shelter residents had given her. She'd been quiet since seeing her father's photo, retreating into that silent place children go when the world becomes too confusing to process. Diane sat across from them, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and it's going to be difficult. When Marcus left, did he have you sign any papers? Anything about finances or property? Sarah's brow furrowed. There was a document. He said it was to refinance our debt, to consolidate everything into one payment. He said it would help us get back on track. Do you have a copy? I don't know. Everything happened so fast after he left. The eviction notices, the debt collectors. I might have packed it with our important documents. We need to find that document, Diane said urgently. Because if my suspicions are correct, You didn't sign a refinancing agreement. You signed away your rights to go after him for the money. Sarah's face went white. That's not possible. I would have read it. Would you? When your husband was crying, telling you he'd destroyed everything, begging for a chance to make it right? Would you have read the fine print? Or would you have signed quickly, wanting to believe in the solution he was offering? The silence that followed was answer enough. I trusted him, Sarah whispered. Even after everything, I still trusted him. Emma looked up at her mother. Mommy, did Daddy steal from us? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating in its clarity. Sarah pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. Yes, baby. I think he did. At Riverside General Hospital, Tommy walked through the main entrance with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He'd changed out of his vest, wearing instead a casual jacket that made him look like a concerned family member, rather than a member of a motorcycle club. The hospital's human resources department was on the 3rd floor, tucked away in a corner that smelled of recycled air and broken dreams. Tommy had done his research. Daniel Whitmore kept regular office hours, arriving at 8 in the morning and leaving at 5 in the afternoon with the punctuality of a man who believed rules applied to everyone but him. It was 3 in the afternoon when Tommy knocked on Whitmore's office door. Come in, a voice called from inside. Daniel Whitmore was younger than Tommy expected, mid-40s with the soft features of someone who'd never faced real hardship. His office was decorated with photos of golf outings, charitable foundation dinners, and award ceremonies where he smiled beside people who looked important. Can I help you? Whitmore asked, his tone friendly but dismissive. I hope so, Tommy said, sitting down without being invited. I'm here about Sarah Mitchell. The change in Whitmore's expression was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening of his shoulders. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss personnel matters with unauthorized individuals. If you're not immediate family or legal counsel, I'm not, Tommy interrupted. But I am someone who's very interested in why a qualified nurse with years of experience was fired and then systematically prevented from finding work anywhere else in the city. Whitmore's face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I've talked to administrators at 5 other hospitals. All of them received calls from you, warning them about Sarah Mitchell, telling them she was financially unstable, potentially untrustworthy. Funny thing is, none of those calls were official HR communications. They were personal favors, friend to friend. You need to leave, Whitmore said, standing up. Now. Tommy didn't move. Here's what I think happened. Your golf buddy Marcus Caldwell asked you to make sure his ex-wife couldn't get back on her feet, couldn't rebuild. Maybe he was worried she'd come after him for the money he stole. Maybe he just wanted to erase his old life completely. Either way, you helped him destroy her. That's slander, Whitmore hissed. Get out before I call security. Go ahead, Tommy said calmly. Call them, and then explain to them why you've been taking payments from Marcus Caldwell. Because financial records are funny things. They leave trails, and those trails lead straight to your offshore accounts. It was a bluff. Tommy had no proof of financial transactions, but the way Whitmore's face went from red to white told him the bluff had landed. What do you want? Whitmore asked, his voice barely audible. Right now? I want you to think about what you've done. I want you to imagine a woman so desperate that her daughter tried to sell her bicycle just to buy food. I want you to picture that child holding a cardboard sign on the street because you and your friend decided her mother didn't deserve to work. Tommy stood up, moving toward the door. And then I want you to wait, because what comes next is going to be a lot worse than a conversation. He left Whitmore standing in his office, trembling with fear and rage. Back at the Lighthouse Foundation, Diane had made dozens of calls, pulling in every favor she'd accumulated over years of advocacy work. By the time the sun began to set, she'd assembled a picture of Marcus Caldwell's new life that was even more disturbing than they'd initially suspected. He's getting married, Diane told Sarah gently, showing her another photo on her phone. This one showed Marcus with a young woman, both of them smiling at some charity gala. Her name is Victoria Sterling. She comes from money. Her father owned Sterling Properties, one of the biggest real estate development companies in the state. Sarah stared at the photo, her expression unreadable. When? The wedding is scheduled for next month. They're calling it the social event of the season. Next month, Sarah repeated. Emma, your father is getting married next month. Emma looked at the photo of her father with the strange woman. Is that my new mommy? The question shattered something in Sarah. She pulled Emma close, sobbing into her daughter's hair. No, baby, no, she's not your mommy. I'm your mommy. I'll always be your mommy. Diane's phone rang. It was Jake. We have a problem, Jake said without preamble. Marcus Caldwell has hired private security. 3 guards who follow him everywhere. He's paranoid about something. About being found, Diane said. He knows what he did. He's been waiting for consequences. Then let's give him some. Tomorrow morning I want you to take Sarah to a lawyer. The best family law attorney in the city. We're going to file for child support, spousal support, and restitution for the money he stole. Jake, Sarah signed a document that might waive her rights. Then we'll challenge the document. Fraud, coercion, whatever it takes. But we're not letting him get away with this. After the call ended, Diane turned to Sarah. Are you ready to fight? Sarah looked at her daughter, at this child who'd tried to sell her most precious possession to save her mother. She thought about the years of gaslighting, the manufactured crisis that had been designed to destroy her. She thought about Marcus living in luxury while Emma went hungry. Yes, Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time in months. I'm ready. That night, Jake gathered his crew at their clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the edge of town. The Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club had started years ago as a group of veterans and outcasts who'd found family in each other. Over time, they'd evolved into something more. Protectors, advocates, the people who showed up when everyone else looked away. Here's what we know, Jake said, laying out photos and documents on the table. Marcus Caldwell systematically destroyed his family to start a new life. He faked a gambling addiction, forged his wife's signature on loans, emptied their accounts, and then disappeared. But he didn't just leave. He made sure Sarah couldn't recover. He had his friend Daniel Whitmore blacklist her from every hospital in the city. Why? Alex asked. Why not just leave? Because loose ends, Derek answered. Sarah could have gone after him for child support, could have filed charges, could have made noise. Easier to destroy her completely than risk exposure. And now he's marrying into money, Diane added. Victoria Sterling's family is connected. Politicians, business leaders, media moguls. Once Marcus becomes part of that family, he'll be untouchable. Not if we move fast, Jake said. Tomorrow, Sarah files legal documents. We make this public before he can hide behind his new family's lawyers. And if that doesn't work? Tommy asked. Jake's expression was grim. Then we get creative. In a small room at the Lighthouse Foundation, Emma lay in a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mother slept in the bed beside her, finally resting after days of stress and starvation. But Emma couldn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to the photo of her father with the strange woman. She remembered the last time she'd seen him. It had been early morning, before dawn. She'd woken up thirsty and walked into the living room. Her father had been standing by the door with a suitcase, checking his phone. Daddy? She'd whispered. He'd turned, and for just a moment, she'd seen something in his eyes. Not love, not regret. Something cold and distant, like she was already a memory he was trying to forget. Go back to bed, Emma, he'd said. Everything's going to be fine. Those were the last words he'd ever spoken to her. Now, lying in the shelter, Emma understood that her father had been lying. Nothing was fine. Nothing had been fine for a long time. But maybe, with the help of these strange bikers who'd stopped when everyone else had looked away, things could become fine again. Maybe her father hadn't wanted them anymore. But these people, these bikers with their loud motorcycles and kind hearts, they wanted to help. And for the first time in months, Emma felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Outside, Jake sat on his motorcycle, staring at the downtown skyline where Marcus Caldwell slept in his expensive penthouse, probably never thinking about the wife and daughter he'd abandoned. Never imagining that his past was about to catch up with him in ways he couldn't control or buy his way out of. Sleep well, Jake muttered to the distant lights, because tomorrow, your perfect new life starts falling apart. The engine roared to life, and Jake rode off into the night, already planning the next move in a war Marcus Caldwell didn't even know he was fighting. But he would. Soon enough, he would. The law offices of Richardson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of the Grandview Tower, a building that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong to the world of power and privilege. Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble lobby, clutching a manila folder containing every document she'd managed to salvage from her old life, feeling completely out of place among the professionals striding past in their expensive shoes. Emma held her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers intertwined with Sarah's in a grip that spoke of both fear and determination. The child had insisted on coming, had refused to stay at the Lighthouse Foundation even when Diane offered to watch her. "I want to help Mommy," Emma had said with a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded Sarah painfully of who her daughter's father used to be, back before the lies had consumed everything good in him. Diane stood beside them, a solid presence in a world that felt increasingly unstable. She'd made the appointment with Catherine Richardson herself, calling in a favor from a case years ago when the attorney had needed the shelter's testimony in a custody battle. "Catherine is the best," Diane had assured Sarah during the ride over. "If anyone can untangle this mess, it's her." Now, as they stepped into the elevator, Sarah felt her stomach churning with anxiety, and something else she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, justice was possible. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. Behind the desk, a receptionist smiled warmly at them, her expression showing none of the judgment Sarah had grown accustomed to seeing in people's eyes. "You must be Sarah Mitchell. Ms. Richardson is expecting you. Please, follow me." Catherine Richardson's office overlooked the city, windows offering a view that stretched for miles. But what struck Sarah most wasn't the expensive furniture or the wall of legal degrees. It was the woman herself. Catherine Richardson was in her 50s, with silver streaking through dark hair she wore pulled back in a practical style. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, but there was warmth there too, compassion tempered by experience. She rose from her desk as they entered, coming around to greet them at eye level, rather than from behind the barrier of power her position afforded. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand, "and you must be Emma. I'm very glad you're here. Sometimes the bravest witnesses are the smallest ones." Emma's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah felt her daughter stand a little straighter. Catherine gestured to a comfortable seating area away from her desk, creating an atmosphere more conducive to conversation than interrogation. "Diane has filled me in on the basics, but I need to hear everything from you. Every detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Can you do that?" For the next hour, Sarah relived the nightmare of her marriage's collapse. Catherine listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When Sarah described the document Marcus had her sign, Catherine's pen stopped moving. "Do you have a copy of this document?" Catherine asked carefully. Sarah pulled papers from her folder with trembling hands. "I found it last night. I'd packed it with our birth certificates and Emma's school records. I never really looked at it after I signed. Marcus said it was just paperwork, that it would help us." Catherine took the document and began reading. Sarah watched the attorney's face change, watched anger flash in those intelligent eyes. "This isn't a debt consolidation agreement," Catherine said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is a full liability waiver and settlement release. By signing this, you agreed to assume all marital debt and waived your right to seek any financial compensation from your husband for past, present, or future obligations." Sarah felt the room tilt, but that's not what he told me it was. "I can see that. Sarah, this document was drawn up by a lawyer. See this firm name at the bottom, Blackstone Legal Services. They specialize in asset protection for high net worth individuals. This wasn't something your husband cobbled together online. He paid serious money to have attorneys create a legal framework that would allow him to abandon you while protecting himself from any consequences." Emma looked up at her mother. "What does that mean?" Catherine turned to the child, her expression softening. "It means your daddy hired people to help him do something very wrong. But it also means we can prove he lied to your mommy. And when people lie to get important papers signed, judges don't like that very much." "Can we fight it?" Diane asked. "Can we prove fraud?" "We can try. The challenge is that Sarah's signature is genuine. To prove fraud, we need to demonstrate that Marcus knowingly misrepresented what she was signing. We need evidence that he deliberately deceived her." "I have evidence," Sarah said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I have text messages from right before he left. He was texting someone about the papers, about getting me to sign before I figured things out. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but I saved them because some part of me knew something was wrong. Catherine leaned forward. Do you still have access to those messages? They're on my old phone, the one I couldn't afford to keep active after he left. It's in storage with our other belongings. We need that phone, Catherine said. Today. Those messages could be exactly what we need to prove intentional fraud. Derek, who'd been waiting outside the office, drove Sarah and Diane to the storage facility on the outskirts of town. Emma stayed with Catherine, who'd produced coloring books and promised to teach her about how lawyers help people. The storage unit was small and depressing, containing the remnants of Sarah's old life. Furniture they'd had to abandon when they couldn't pay rent, boxes of clothes Emma had outgrown, framed photos of a family that no longer existed. Sarah found the phone in a box marked Important Documents. Its battery dead, but the device itself intact. Please let it still work, Sarah whispered as Derek helped her carry boxes back to his motorcycle. At a phone repair shop downtown, a technician managed to charge the device and recover the data. Sarah's hand shook as she scrolled through old messages, months of communication with the man she'd loved, the man she'd trusted. And then she found them. Messages to a contact saved only as J.B. They later revealed to be his attorney, Jonathan Blackstone. Got her to sign. Didn't read it, just like you said. Too emotional to focus. Perfect. Now you're clear. The gambling story worked. She believes it completely. Feel guilty, though. Emma cried today. You'll get over it. Focus on your new life. They'll be fine eventually. Sarah felt something break and reform inside her chest. These weren't the words of a man who'd made mistakes. These were the words of a predator who'd systematically destroyed his family with calculated precision. Diane, Sarah said, her voice eerily calm, I need you to take me back to Catherine's office. Now. At Prestige Investment Services, Marcus Caldwell was having an excellent day. He'd just closed a deal that would net him a six-figure commission. His fiancée had sent him photos of wedding venue options, and his boss had hinted at a promotion. Life was exactly as he'd planned it. Successful, stress-free, and completely detached from the failures of his past. He'd stopped thinking about Sarah and Emma months ago. They were problems he'd solved. Loose ends he'd tied up with legal documents and careful planning. Sometimes, late at night, he'd feel a twinge of something that might have been guilt. But then he'd remember the weight of responsibility, the constant worry about money, the feeling of being trapped in a life that was too small for his ambitions. He'd convinced himself he'd done them a favor. Now they could rebuild without him holding them back. Now Emma could grow up without a father who resented his obligations. The rationalizations came easily after months of practice. His phone rang. It was Daniel Whitmore. We have a problem. Daniel's voice was tight with panic. Someone's asking questions. Some biker came to my office yesterday, knew about Sarah, knew about the calls I made. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. What did you tell them? Nothing. But Marcus, they know. Somehow they know everything. And there's more. I just got served with legal documents. Sarah's filing a lawsuit against both of us. The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's grip. That's impossible. She signed the waiver. She has no legal standing. She's challenging the waiver, claims fraud. And Marcus, she has evidence. Text messages between you and Blackstone. How did she get those? Marcus's mind raced. He'd been so careful. He'd deleted everything from his current phone, had created new accounts, had built walls between his old life and his new one. But the old phone, the one he'd left behind in their apartment. The phone, he whispered. She found the old phone. What phone? Marcus, what are you talking about? I have to go. Marcus ended the call, his hands shaking. His assistant knocked on his office door. Mr. Caldwell, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Tell them I'm busy. Sir, she says her name is Victoria Sterling, your fiancée. Marcus's blood ran cold. Victoria wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be at a fashion show across town. Why was she here? He opened his door to find Victoria standing in the hallway, her expression unreadable. In her hand was a manila envelope. We need to talk, she said. Now. They moved to his office, and Marcus closed the door with a sense of impending doom. Victoria placed the envelope on his desk. This was delivered to my father's office this morning. It's addressed to me, from a law firm. I opened it thinking it was about our wedding contracts. Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. It's a legal filing, Victoria continued, her voice eerily calm. A lawsuit against you from someone named Sarah Mitchell. Your wife. Your current legal wife, Marcus. The one you forgot to divorce before proposing to me. Ex-wife, Marcus said automatically. We're separated. Separated is not divorced. And according to these documents, you didn't just separate. You committed fraud, stole $70,000, forged her signature on loans, and then abandoned her and your daughter. Your daughter, Marcus. You have a child. Victoria, I can explain. There's more, she interrupted. The filing includes affidavits from hospital administrators saying you had your friend blacklist your wife from employment. It includes text messages where you discuss manipulating her into signing away her rights. It includes photos of your daughter trying to sell her bicycle on the street because she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She pulled out a photo from the envelope. It showed Emma, small and desperate, holding her cardboard sign. Victoria's hand trembled as she held it. She's beautiful, Victoria whispered. She looks like you. How could you do this to her? Marcus felt his carefully constructed new life crumbling around him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to send money eventually once I was established. I just needed time to build something first. You needed time to erase them, Victoria corrected. You needed time to pretend they never existed so you could start fresh with me and my family's money. That's not fair. My father built his empire on integrity, Victoria said, her voice hardening. He taught me that character is measured not by how you treat people who can help you, but by how you treat people who can't fight back. You abandoned a woman and child who couldn't fight back. You used me to climb social ladders while your daughter starved. She removed her engagement ring and placed it on his desk. We're done. The wedding is cancelled. And Marcus? My father's attorneys will be reaching out to yours. Because unlike you, I actually care about what happens to that little girl. Marcus watched her walk out, the door closing with a finality that echoed through his hollow chest. In the span of 10 minutes, his perfect new life had begun to disintegrate. His phone rang again. It was his boss. Marcus, we need to talk. I've received some disturbing information about your personal situation. I'm going to need you to take a leave of absence while we investigate. One by one, the dominoes he'd so carefully arranged began to fall. Back at Catherine Richardson's office, Sarah sat with Emma, reviewing the legal strategy. The text messages had changed everything. Catherine was filing emergency motions for child support, spousal support, and restitution. She was also pursuing fraud charges that could result in criminal prosecution. This won't be easy, Catherine warned. Marcus will hire expensive attorneys. He'll fight every step. But Sarah, you have something he doesn't. The truth. And sometimes, that's enough. Emma tugged on Catherine's sleeve. Will my daddy go to jail? Catherine crouched down to the child's level. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you this. He won't be able to hurt you or your mommy anymore. That's what justice means. It means protecting people who've been hurt. Jake arrived with news. Victoria Sterling cancelled the wedding. She's also putting pressure on Marcus's employer. And there's more. Daniel Whitmore is being investigated by the State Medical Board for ethics violations. Turns out using your position to blacklist someone isn't just immoral. It's illegal. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of vindication, of justice finally arriving after a long, dark wait. What happens now? She asked. Now, Catherine said, we rebuild your life while we dismantle his. As they left the office that evening, Emma looked up at her mother. Mommy, are we going to be okay? Sarah knelt down, pulling her daughter close. Yes, baby. We're going to be more than okay. Because we have something Daddy never understood. We have people who love us. We have truth on our side. And we have each other. Emma hugged her mother tightly. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, sweetheart. Forever and always. From the street below, Jake watched them through the building's glass walls, mother and daughter holding each other against the dying light. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to his crew. Mission accomplished. The truth is out. Now we watch him fall. And fall Marcus Caldwell would. Because the consequences he'd spent months trying to avoid were finally, inevitably, catching up to him. Justice, it turned out, might be slow, but it was also relentless. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Sarah arrived for the preliminary hearing. News of the lawsuit had spread through social media like wildfire, transforming from a private family tragedy into a public reckoning. Someone had leaked Emma's photo with the for sale sign, and the image had gone viral overnight with the caption, "While her father lived in luxury, this child tried to sell her bicycle to feed her starving mother." The public response had been explosive. Jake and his crew formed a protective barrier around Sarah and Emma, their presence both intimidating and reassuring. Camera flashes erupted as they made their way through the crowd, reporters shouting questions that Sarah tried desperately to ignore. "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you feel about your husband's betrayal? Emma, what do you want to say to your father? Is it true Marcus Caldwell stole $70,000? Diane kept her hand on Emma's shoulder, guiding the child through the chaos with practiced ease. "Eyes forward, sweetheart. Don't listen to them. Just keep walking." Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted from circus to cathedral. The marble halls absorbed sound, creating pockets of quiet that felt sacred after the madness outside. Catherine Richardson met them in a conference room, her expression serious but confident. Marcus's attorneys arrived an hour ago, Catherine informed them. 3 lawyers from Whitmore and Associates, one of the most expensive firms in the state. They're going to argue that the waiver is valid, that Sarah signed voluntarily, and that any financial hardship she experienced was due to her own poor choices, not Marcus's actions. Sarah felt her stomach twist. Can they win? They can try. But we have the text messages. We have the timing of events. We have Victoria Sterling's sworn statement about Marcus's deception. And we have something else they don't expect. What? Catherine smiled grimly. We have Emma. If the judge allows it, I want her to testify. Not about legal matters, but about the impact of her father's abandonment. About what it felt like to be so hungry she tried to sell her most precious possession. Judges are human, Sarah. And sometimes, the testimony of a child cuts through legal arguments in ways nothing else can. Emma, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up. I can talk to the judge? Only if you want to, sweetheart. Only if you feel brave enough. Emma's small hand found her mother's. I want to. I want him to know what Daddy did to us. In another conference room down the hall, Marcus Caldwell sat surrounded by his legal team, feeling like a prisoner despite the expensive suits and leather briefcases that surrounded him. His lead attorney, Gerald Whitmore, no relation to Daniel, though Marcus was starting to think everyone in his life was named Whitmore, had been blunt about their challenges. The text messages are damaging, Gerald said, spreading the evidence across the table. Your conversations with Blackstone show clear intent to deceive. The timing of Victoria Sterling's cancelled wedding doesn't help, and the viral photo of your daughter has turned public opinion against you in ways that will influence the judge, whether he admits it or not. So what do we do? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. We argue technicalities. The waiver is legally binding regardless of how it was obtained, unless we can prove actual duress or incapacity. Your ex-wife was not under duress when she signed. She was fully capable of reading the document. The fact that she chose not to read it carefully is not grounds for invalidation. That sounds cold, one of the junior attorneys observed. It is cold, Gerald agreed. But it's also the law. Caveat emptor applies to contracts, even between spouses. She had a responsibility to understand what she was signing. Marcus stared at the photo of Emma holding her sign. His daughter. His little girl. He barely recognized her in the image. When had she grown so thin? When had those shadows appeared under her eyes? He remembered her as a toddler, laughing as he pushed her on a swing. Remembered her 5th birthday when they'd taken her to the zoo and she'd cried because she thought the lions looked sad in their enclosure. We should set them free, Daddy, she'd said with the absolute moral certainty only children possess. Now she was the one trapped, and he was the one who'd built the cage. There's another option, Gerald said carefully. We could settle. Agree to child support, spousal support for a limited term, and partial restitution. It would cost you significantly, but it would avoid a trial, avoid more publicity. How much? Conservatively, $300,000 up front plus monthly payments for the next decade. Maybe more if they push hard. Marcus did the math in his head. It would destroy his savings, compromise his lifestyle, make the life he'd built infinitely more complicated. But it would also end this nightmare before it consumed everything. Let me think about it, he said. The preliminary hearing took place in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and older decisions. Judge Raymond Chen presided, a man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness tempered by intolerance for deception. He reviewed the case documents with meticulous attention before addressing the attorneys. This is a motion to invalidate a settlement agreement and waiver based on allegations of fraud. Ms. Richardson, you bear the burden of proof. Present your case. Catherine stood, her posture radiating confidence. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Marcus Caldwell engaged in systematic fraud to deceive his wife into signing away her legal rights. We have text messages showing deliberate intent to mislead. We have evidence of fabricated financial crises designed to create emotional vulnerability. And we have testimony about the devastating consequences of his actions. She presented the text messages, projecting them onto a screen where everyone could read Marcus's words. Got her to sign. Didn't read it, just like you said. Too emotional to focus. The courtroom fell silent as the implications settled over the room like ash. Gerald Whitmore rose to object. Your Honor, while these messages show questionable moral character, they don't prove legal fraud. Mrs. Mitchell was not prevented from reading the document. She chose not to read it carefully. That choice, however regrettable, doesn't invalidate her signature. The choice was manufactured, Catherine countered. Mr. Caldwell created a false crisis, manipulated his wife's emotional state, and deliberately rushed her through signing documents she couldn't properly evaluate. That's textbook fraud under state contract law. Judge Chen studied the messages again. I'm inclined to agree that there are serious questions about the validity of this waiver. However, I need to hear testimony before making any preliminary rulings. Ms. Richardson, call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Sarah Mitchell. Sarah walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, her hand trembling as she placed it on the Bible to swear her oath. She'd practiced this moment with Catherine, had rehearsed her testimony until she could recite it in her sleep. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of sitting in this chair, looking out at the courtroom where her husband sat surrounded by lawyers, refusing to meet her eyes. Catherine guided her through the testimony with gentle questions. Sarah described their marriage, the slow accumulation of financial problems, the night Marcus had presented the documents. He was crying, Sarah said, her voice breaking at the memory. He said he'd ruined everything, that this was our only chance to start over. I trusted him. Even after everything, I still trusted him. Did you read the entire document before signing? I started to, but Marcus said we needed to submit it that night, that the deadline was immediate. He stood over me while I signed, telling me it was going to be okay, that this would save us. I wanted so badly to believe him. And after he left? Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. I tried to work, but I'd been blacklisted from every hospital in the city. My wages were garnished for debt I didn't even know existed. We lost our apartment, our savings, everything. I got sick from the stress and lost my job. And through it all, I thought Marcus was suffering too. I thought we were both victims of his gambling addiction. When did you learn the truth? When I saw his photo. When I realized he was alive, successful, engaged to another woman. When I understood that everything he'd told me was a lie designed to destroy me while he built a new life. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several reporters were wiping their eyes. Gerald Whitmore stood for cross-examination, but his questions were careful, almost gentle. Even he seemed aware that attacking Sarah too aggressively would backfire spectacularly. Mrs. Mitchell, you've stated that you signed the document voluntarily, correct? Under false pretenses, yes. But no one physically forced you to sign? No. My husband psychologically manipulated me into signing. There's a difference. That's for the judge to decide, Gerald said, returning to his seat. Judge Chen made a note. Ms. Richardson, any other witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Emma Mitchell. The courtroom stirred. Calling a child to testify was unusual in civil cases, especially one so young. But Catherine had filed the proper motions, and the judge had granted permission. Emma walked to the witness stand with Derek and Diane, both offering her encouraging smiles. The bailiff brought over a step stool so she could reach the microphone, and Judge Chen leaned forward with a grandfatherly expression. Hello, Emma. Do you know why you're here today? Emma nodded solemnly. To tell the truth about what happened. That's right. And do you promise to tell the truth? Yes, sir. My mommy says lying is wrong, even when the truth is hard. A few people in the courtroom made soft sounds of sympathy. Catherine approached with gentle questions. Emma, do you remember when your father lived with you and your mother? Yes. We used to have dinner together. Daddy would read me stories before bed. He said he loved me. Do you remember when he left? Emma's voice became smaller. I woke up one night and he was standing by the door with a suitcase. I asked where he was going. He told me to go back to bed, that everything would be fine. Was everything fine? No. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she kept speaking. Mommy cried a lot. We didn't have enough food. The lights stopped working. We had to leave our apartment. Mommy got sick, but she couldn't go to the doctor because we didn't have money. Catherine handed Emma a tissue. Do you know why you were trying to sell your bicycle that day? Because Mommy hadn't eaten in 2 days. I thought if I could sell my bike, I could buy her food. I didn't want my mommy to die. The last sentence broke something in the courtroom. Sarah was sobbing quietly. Several jury members were crying. Even the bailiff looked away, composing himself. Gerald Whitmore declined to cross-examine. Even he wasn't willing to question a traumatized child in front of cameras. Judge Chen cleared his throat, visibly moved. Emma, thank you for your testimony. You're very brave. You can step down now. As Emma returned to her mother, Marcus finally looked up. He saw his daughter properly for the first time in months. Saw how thin she'd become, saw the shadows under her eyes, saw the way she clung to Sarah as if afraid of being separated. And for the first time since this whole situation began, Marcus Caldwell felt genuine shame. Your Honor, Gerald Whitmore stood suddenly. May we request a brief recess? My client wishes to discuss a potential settlement. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. Very well. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. In the conference room, Marcus sat with his head in his hands while his attorneys laid out the terms of the proposed settlement, but he barely heard them. All he could see was Emma's face, the way she'd looked at him with those eyes full of hurt and confusion. I'll agree to everything, Marcus said suddenly. Whatever they want. Child support, spousal support, restitution, all of it. Gerald paused. Marcus, that's a significant financial commitment. Are you certain? I destroyed my family. I need to fix it, or at least try to make it right. You understand this will likely bankrupt you? The restitution alone, combined with ongoing support payments? I don't care about the money anymore, Marcus interrupted. I thought I did. I thought the money would make me happy, would make me successful. But all it did was turn me into someone my daughter is afraid of. He looked at his attorneys with red-rimmed eyes. Draft the settlement. Give them everything they're asking for. And Gerald, include a formal apology. I want it in writing. I want Emma to have something she can read when she's older, something that explains I was wrong and I'm sorry. When court reconvened, Gerald Whitmore presented the settlement offer. Catherine reviewed it with Sarah, who read each term with disbelief growing on her face. Full restitution of $70,000, paid within 90 days. Child support at the maximum state guideline amount until Emma turned 18. Spousal support for 5 years. An additional $50,000 for emotional damages. And a written apology, acknowledging his fraud and its consequences. He's agreeing to all of this? Sarah whispered. Yes, Catherine confirmed. Your testimony moved him. Emma's testimony broke him. This is more than we expected to get even if we won at trial. Sarah looked across the courtroom to where Marcus sat, his expensive suit somehow looking shabby on his defeated frame. Their eyes met for the first time in months. She saw regret there, maybe even remorse, but she also saw something else. The knowledge that some things once broken can never be fully repaired. Accept it, Sarah said. Not because I forgive him, but because Emma deserves security. She deserves to know her father's betrayal won't define her future. Catherine presented the acceptance to the judge. Judge Chen reviewed the settlement terms and nodded with satisfaction. This court accepts the settlement agreement. Mr. Caldwell, you will comply with all terms outlined herein. Failure to do so will result in immediate enforcement actions, including wage garnishment and potential contempt charges. Do you understand? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Good. Then let me say something off the record. Judge Chen's voice hardened. Mr. Caldwell, I've presided over thousands of cases in my career. I've seen cruelty. I've seen violence. I've seen crimes that would haunt your nightmares. But there's something particularly disturbing about what you did. You didn't just abandon your family. You systematically destroyed them to protect your own comfort. You weaponized your wife's trust and your daughter's love." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The law can force you to pay money. It cannot force you to be a decent human being. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself." Court dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified. But this time, Sarah walked through it with her head held high. She had her settlement. She had justice. She had her daughter's hand in hers. Emma looked up at her mother. "Is it over, Mommy?" "The hard part is over, baby. Now we get to start building our new life." Jake and the crew waited by their motorcycles, ready to escort Sarah and Emma back to the Lighthouse Foundation. But Diane had different news. "Sarah, I have something to tell you. The story of what happened went viral. People across the country heard about Emma trying to sell her bicycle. They wanted to help." She pulled out her phone, showing Sarah a crowdfunding page that had been set up without their knowledge. The goal had been $5,000. The current total was over $200,000. People donated, Diane explained, her voice thick with emotion. Families, businesses, even some celebrities. They wanted Emma to have her childhood back. They wanted you to rebuild without the burden of debt. Sarah stared at the number, unable to process what she was seeing. "That's not possible. It's more than possible. It's real. Sarah, between this and the settlement, you can afford a new apartment. Emma can go to a good school. You can get medical treatment. You can breathe again." Sarah collapsed against Diane, sobbing with relief so profound it felt physical. Emma hugged them both, not fully understanding but knowing something good had finally happened. Jake stepped forward, a rare smile on his weathered face. "There's one more thing. Your bicycle is in my truck. We got it cleaned up, fixed the training wheels, added new streamers. It's ready for Emma to ride again. Not to sell, just to be a bike." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? And kiddo, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Don't ever forget that." As they drove away from the courthouse, Sarah watched the building disappear in the side mirror. Somewhere inside, Marcus was probably dealing with his attorneys, beginning the process of dismantling the life he'd built on lies. She didn't hate him anymore. Hate required too much energy, and she needed every ounce of her strength for rebuilding. But she didn't forgive him either. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness. What she felt was something more complex. Grief for what could have been, relief for what had ended, and hope for what might still come. Emma fell asleep against her mother's shoulder during the ride, exhausted from the emotional weight of her testimony. Sarah held her close, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, feeling gratitude so deep it ached. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. And now, finally, they could begin to truly live again. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new apartment, watching golden afternoon light stream through windows that overlooked a small park where children played on swings and climbing structures. The space was modest but clean, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled of fresh paint, and a living room where Emma's artwork already decorated the refrigerator with colorful drawings of motorcycles and people holding hands. It felt like home in a way their old apartment never had, because this space wasn't built on lies or false promises. It was built on survival, resilience, and the kindness of strangers who'd become family. Emma burst through the front door, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face flushed with the kind of healthy glow that comes from regular meals and genuine happiness. She'd gained weight over the past months, her cheeks filling out, the shadows disappearing from under her eyes. "Mommy, guess what happened at school today?" Sarah smiled, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "Tell me everything. Mrs. Peterson asked us to write about someone brave we know, and I wrote about you, about how you kept fighting even when everything was scary, about how you never gave up on us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Baby, you're the brave one. You're the one who stood on that street corner trying to save us both. We're both brave," Emma decided, with the simple wisdom only children possess. "And so are Jake and Diane and Derek and Tommy and Alex. Brave people find other brave people. That's what makes families." The words hung in the air, profound in their innocence. Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of childhood that she'd been terrified of losing during those dark months when hunger had become their constant companion. "You're right, sweetheart. That's exactly what makes families." Across town, at Riverside General Hospital, Daniel Whitmore sat in a conference room facing a panel from the State Medical Board Ethics Committee. His career, once promising and secure, had unraveled with devastating speed after Tommy's visit to his office. The investigation had uncovered not just his blacklisting of Sarah, but a pattern of behavior stretching back years. Other employees he'd targeted for personal reasons, favorable treatment given to friends and family. Small corruptions that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a picture of someone who'd abused his position systematically. "Mr. Whitmore," the committee chair said, her voice cold with professional disappointment, "your actions constitute gross violations of professional ethics. You weaponized your authority to destroy someone's livelihood at the request of a personal friend. You placed your loyalty to Marcus Caldwell above your duty to fair employment practices." Daniel wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he'd just been helping a friend, that he hadn't understood the full consequences. But the words died in his throat when the committee displayed Emma's viral photo on the screen behind them. "This child," the chair continued, "nearly starved because you ensured her mother couldn't work. Whatever Marcus Caldwell's crimes, you enabled them. You made them possible." The verdict was unanimous: termination from his position, revocation of his professional certifications, and a recommendation that criminal charges be pursued for conspiracy to commit fraud. Daniel walked out of the hospital for the last time, carrying a box with his few personal belongings, facing a future that looked nothing like the one he'd imagined when he'd agreed to make those phone calls for Marcus. His wife had left him when the story went public. His country club membership had been revoked. Friends who'd once returned his calls now let them go to voicemail. He'd learned the hard way that enabling evil, even passively, makes you complicit in its consequences. At Prestige Investment Services, Marcus Caldwell's fall had been equally dramatic. His employer had terminated him immediately after the settlement became public. No financial services firm wanted the liability of an advisor who'd committed documented fraud, even if it was against his own family. His professional licenses were under review. His professional reputation was destroyed. Social circles that had welcomed him now closed their doors. But the financial consequences were only part of his punishment. Marcus sat alone in a much smaller apartment now, the luxury penthouse gone to pay the initial restitution. He worked as a financial consultant for a small firm that specialized in bankruptcy cases, earning a fraction of his previous salary. Every month, a significant portion of his paycheck was automatically deducted for child support and spousal support. He'd kept one photo from his old life, not a picture of Victoria or his former success. A photo of Emma as a toddler, laughing as he pushed her on a swing, her face full of trust and joy. He looked at it every night, trying to remember the man he'd been before ambition had consumed his humanity. His phone rang. It was his attorney. "Marcus, I have news. Sarah has agreed to supervised visitation. If you want to see Emma, if you want to try to rebuild some kind of relationship, she's willing to allow it. With conditions." Marcus's hands shook. "What conditions?" "Therapy. For you and Emma, separately and together. A child psychologist will supervise all visits until they determine it's safe for unsupervised contact. And Marcus, Sarah made it clear. This isn't for you. It's for Emma. If she decides she doesn't want contact, that decision will be respected." "I understand," Marcus whispered. "When can I start?" "Next week. The psychologist's office. 1 hour. Marcus, don't waste this chance. Some children never forgive their parents. If Emma is willing to try, you need to be worthy of that gift." After the call ended, Marcus stared at the photo again. He'd spent months rationalizing his choices, telling himself he'd been escaping an impossible situation, that he'd been pursuing success. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He'd been a coward who'd chosen comfort over character. Now he had a chance, however slim, to begin earning back his daughter's trust. Not her love. That was gone. Perhaps forever. But maybe, someday, she might not flinch when she saw him. It was more than he deserved, and less than he'd thrown away. At the Lighthouse Foundation, Diane hosted a celebration that had been planned for weeks. The shelter's main hall was decorated with streamers and balloons, and tables were loaded with food prepared by volunteers from across the city. Sarah had officially accepted a position as the Foundation's community outreach coordinator, using her nursing background and personal experience to help other women navigate the systems that had nearly destroyed her. Her first paycheck had arrived that morning, deposited in a bank account that was finally in positive numbers. "Speech!" someone called from the crowd, and others took up the chant. "Speech! Speech!" Sarah stood reluctantly, her face flushing as dozens of faces turned toward her. Women she'd met at the shelter, volunteers who'd helped her rebuild, and the Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club members who'd started this whole transformation. "I don't know what to say," Sarah began, her voice shaking. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd failed my daughter. I thought the world was a place where cruelty won and kindness was a fairy tale. She paused, collecting her thoughts. But then a group of strangers on motorcycles stopped when everyone else looked away. They saw a child trying to sell a bicycle, and they decided to care. They decided that one little girl's pain mattered, and that decision changed everything. Jake, standing near the back with his crew, shifted uncomfortably with the attention. "What I've learned," Sarah continued, "is that the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's divided into people who see suffering and look away, and people who see suffering and stop. Jake, Diane, Derek, Tommy, Alex, all of you, you stopped. And because you stopped, Emma has a future. I have a future." Emma walked to her mother's side, taking her hand. Together they addressed the room. "There are women here tonight who are where I was 3 months ago," Sarah said. "Desperate, afraid, convinced they're alone. I want you to know something. You're not alone. The world is full of people who will stop if you let them see you. And sometimes the people who look the scariest, the ones with leather vests and loud motorcycles, are the ones with the biggest hearts." The room erupted in applause. Jake found himself surrounded by people thanking him, hugging him, treating him like a hero when all he'd done was what any decent person should do. Later, when the celebration wound down, Jake found Sarah and Emma on the Foundation's back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "For everything." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "We just did what was right." "No," Sarah corrected. "You did what most people wouldn't. You saw us. You stopped. You cared. That's not nothing, Jake. That's everything." Emma tugged on Jake's vest. "Will you teach me to ride a motorcycle when I'm older?" Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Tell you what, kid. When you're old enough, I'll teach you to ride. But first, you gotta promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll remember how strong you are. Promise me that when you see someone hurting, someone struggling, you'll stop. You'll care. You'll be the person for them that we were for you." Emma nodded solemnly. "I promise. I'm gonna help people just like you helped us." "That's my girl," Jake said, ruffling her hair. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah reflected on how dramatically their lives had transformed. The viral photo that had exposed their suffering had also mobilized an army of compassion. Donations had poured in from across the country. Job offers had arrived from hospitals that wanted to demonstrate they valued character over credit scores. But more than the money or opportunities, what had changed was something internal. Sarah no longer felt invisible. She no longer believed she was worthless because someone she'd loved had discarded her. She'd learned that her value wasn't determined by Marcus's abandonment. It was determined by how she'd fought for her daughter, how she'd survived impossible circumstances, and how she'd chosen to transform her pain into purpose by helping others. 6 months after the courthouse hearing, Emma rode her bicycle through the park near their apartment, the restored streamers flying behind her in the wind, the basket filled with flowers she'd picked from the community garden. She was laughing, racing against other neighborhood children, completely carefree in a way that had seemed impossible during those dark months. Sarah watched from a bench, sitting beside Derek, who'd become something unexpected. A friend. Not a romance. Not a replacement for the husband who'd betrayed her. Just a good man who'd appeared when she needed one, and who'd chosen to stay even after the crisis had passed. "She looks happy," Derek observed. "She is happy," Sarah confirmed. "For the first time in a long time, she's just a child. Not a survivor. Not a victim. Just a kid who gets to be a kid. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus's therapist. The supervised visit last week had gone well. Emma had been nervous but not terrified. Marcus had apologized, not with justifications or excuses, but with simple acknowledgement of his failures. The therapist recommended continuing visits, with the possibility of unsupervised contact in several months if progress continued. Sarah wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her wanted to protect Emma from any further hurt, but another part recognized that Emma deserved the chance to know her father, even if that father was profoundly flawed. She'd let Emma decide. When the time came, when Emma was old enough to understand the choice, Sarah would support whatever decision her daughter made. "You know what I realized?" Sarah said to Derek. "I spent years trying to fix Marcus, trying to save our marriage, trying to be enough for him. And the whole time, I was enough. He was the one who was broken, and his brokenness wasn't my responsibility to fix. Took me years to learn that same lesson," Derek admitted. "My ex-wife left me for her personal trainer, cleaned out our accounts, took the car, disappeared. I blamed myself for years. Thought if I'd been more successful, more attentive, more something, she wouldn't have left. What changed? Jake told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Derek, you can't make someone love you. You can't make someone choose integrity. All you can do is be the best version of yourself and trust that the people who are meant to be in your life will show up.' Your daughter showed up. These people," he gestured toward the Rolling Thunder members scattered around the park. "They showed up. That's your tribe. That's your family." Sarah smiled, watching Emma complete another lap around the park path, her face glowing with exertion and joy. "Yeah, this is my family." 1 year after Emma stood on Riverside Avenue with her cardboard sign, the Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club organized a charity ride to raise money for the Lighthouse Foundation. 200 motorcycles participated, their engines creating a symphony of power and purpose as they rode through the city. Emma rode in a sidecar attached to Jake's bike, waving at spectators with the enthusiasm only children can maintain for hours. Sarah rode behind Derek, her arms wrapped around his waist, marveling at how far they'd traveled in 12 months. The ride ended at the park where it had all begun. The tree where Emma's bicycle had leaned now bore a plaque. "On this spot, a child's courage changed a community. Emma Mitchell, age 7, stood here when no one else would stop. She reminded us that compassion isn't convenient, it's essential. May we all have the courage to stop when others walk past." The crowd gathered for the unveiling included reporters, local officials, and dozens of families whose lives had been touched by the Lighthouse Foundation's expanded programs. Sarah's story had inspired legislation protecting domestic abuse survivors from debt incurred through spousal fraud. Emma's testimony had motivated new workplace protections against blacklisting. Their pain had become purpose. Their suffering had catalyzed change. As Sarah stood before the plaque, Emma at her side, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The hunger, the fear, the humiliation, but also the kindness, the solidarity, the discovery that humanity's capacity for compassion was as infinite as its capacity for cruelty. "Mommy," Emma whispered, "does this mean we're famous?" Sarah laughed. "No, baby. This means we're survivors. And more importantly, it means we're helpers. Because that's what survivors do. We turn around and help the people still climbing out of the darkness." Emma considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. "I like that better than famous." Jake approached, his weathered face creased with emotion. "Sarah, there's someone who wants to meet you." He gestured to a young woman standing nervously at the edge of the crowd. She was maybe 19, with a small child clinging to her leg, wearing clothes that had seen better days. "My name is Rachel," the young woman said, her voice barely audible. "My husband left us 6 weeks ago. Took everything. I've been living in my car with my daughter. I saw your story. I saw Emma's photo. And I thought, maybe there's hope. Maybe there are people who'll stop." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, taking Rachel's trembling hand. "There's hope. There are people. And you just found them." Within hours, Rachel and her daughter were settled at the Lighthouse Foundation. Within days, Sarah had connected her with legal resources, job opportunities, and a support network that would help her rebuild. The cycle continued. Suffering transformed into strength, victims becoming advocates, darkness giving way to light, one stopped moment at a time. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed in their safe, warm apartment, Emma asked the question she'd been holding inside for months. "Mommy, do you still love Daddy?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I love the man I thought he was. I love the father you deserved. But the person he chose to become? No, baby. I don't love that person. And that's okay. Love doesn't mean accepting betrayal. Love means protecting the people who matter most. You matter most. Do you think he'll ever be good again?" "I think he's trying. The therapy reports say he's working hard to understand what he did. But Emma, here's the truth. Whether or not he becomes a better person isn't our responsibility. Our responsibility is to live good lives, to be kind people, and to never let his choices define us." Emma thought about this, then smiled. "I think we're doing a good job at that. We're doing a great job, sweetheart." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Sarah walked to the window overlooking the park. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably looking at that same sky, carrying the weight of choices that could never be unmade. Daniel Whitmore was probably wrestling with similar regrets. She didn't wish them suffering, but she didn't wish them redemption either. What she wished was that they'd learned, that maybe they'd become warnings to others who were tempted to choose selfishness over responsibility. But mostly, she stopped thinking about them at all, because the future wasn't about Marcus Caldwell's regrets or Daniel Whitmore's consequences. The future was about Emma's laughter, about Rachel's recovery, about every woman who walked into the Lighthouse Foundation and walked out stronger. The future was about the moment when a group of bikers stopped their motorcycles and decided that one little girl's pain mattered. The future was about choosing to care when walking away would be easier. And that future, Sarah realized, was already here. They were living it, building it, creating it with every act of compassion, every moment of solidarity, every decision to stop when others walked past. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about motorcycles and brave people finding each other. Sarah smiled, pulling the blanket up around her daughter's shoulders. They were home. They were safe. They were enough. And in a world that often felt cruel and indifferent, that was everything.